Welcome back everybody to another week of data visualization in Python. Today we're going to focus on the dropdown. We are going to learn everything that we can do with the dropdown. We're going to learn how to add values here, how if we change the values, it changes the values on the chart, how we can play around with the styling, how we can clear the values, type in some values. So really everything you can do with a dropdown, because once you know how to master the drop down and play around with it, you can connect it to any chart you want. You can connect it to a pie chart like here. You can connect it to a scatter plot, to a bar chart, to a histogram, really anything you want to do. But before we actually learn how to connect these things, we have to master the drop down. So in order to master the dropdown, we have to learn all its properties. So just click on this link, which is below the video, open the description, open this link, and you'll see that there's at the very bottom, there are all the parameters or properties that we're going to go over. All the properties that Dash has, we are actually going to go over so you can know all of them. We're going to focus on the Dash core components. We're going to focus on the dropdown. There are many other components, but tune in, subscribe below, so every week you can get a notification of a new video, because every week I'm going to talk about a different dropdown, a different component in Dash that you can learn. Okay, so today we're focusing on the dropdown. We are going to use this data, which is data about calls, emergency calls made to New York City Rangers to save animals. And we're going to use some of these columns. So this is also below the video, so just click on the link and open this so you can follow along. And then most importantly, open this code below, because this is the code that we're going to use in order to play around with the dropdown. Okay, so let's start. The first thing you want to do is you want to import the libraries, all these libraries. Of course, pandas is going to be used to read the Excel sheet, and we're going to use Plotly, and we're going to use Dash. If you don't have them installed, just pip install these versions, 4.5.4 and this version here. If you have them installed already in a different version, it should also work if it's not too far away from this version. If you don't know how to do this, just click on the card above in the screen above. That is a video on virtual environments and how to install a virtual environment using Anaconda and installing Dash and Plotly. It'll take you 5 minutes and you'll learn all about how to do this. Okay, so then you want to start the app. This line starts the web app. This line is going to read the data into a pandas data frame so we can use it. It's actually reading the Excel sheet. And then we're going to start the layout here. We're going to go into the graph. I'm going to draw the graph. And then we're going to add just a title above it. And then we're going to focus on the drop down, which is all this right here. So we're going to focus on all these drop-down components one by one so you know what they mean. Okay. Down below, I'm not going to go over this in this video. This part teaches you how to connect the drop-down values to the pie chart. If you want to learn more about this part and understand every single component and the line of code in this, just click on the card above on the second video, which is the pie chart with drop-down component, and it'll teach you all about this. Today, let's just focus on the drop-down. Okay, so let's start from here. The first thing you want to do in a drop-down is to have a drop-down ID. It's very important that every drop-down component has an ID in it, because this is what you use to tie it to graphs in the future. You can tie it to the pie chart or the scatter plot, but you need an ID for it. Then we're going to go over the options. The options are actually the values that appear in the dropdown. These are the options. But how do we put them here? We use this. So as you can see, the options is a list of dictionaries. Each dictionary is an option or a value. And each dictionary, as you know in Python, has a key and a value. In this case, the first part of the dictionary, the key and the value, it represents the label. The label right here and right here, all this column right here, these are all the options, the way you want the user to read this. So you can put anything you want. You can put species, you can put A, you can put S, you can put anything you want in here. That is what the user is going to see on the web app. However, the value right here, which is the right part of the dictionary, the value is actually, this has to align with the Excel columns. In this case, we're using Excel that we are connecting to, or a pandas data frame that we are connecting to the pie chart. So it's gonna look for the Excel columns that the user chooses. So this has to be exactly the name of the Excel column, while this can be anything you want to call it. Okay, so as you can see, in most cases they are the same. Borrow, borrow. Species status, they are the same. Only here it's different because in the Excel sheet it's called animal class. The column is animal class. Let's see, it's right here. You see, animal class column. However, I don't want the user to see animal class. I want the user to see this as species. So when the user clicks on the column options, drop-down options, they'll see species. Okay. So again, the first part is what the user sees, and the second part has to be exactly the name of the Excel or the pandas data frame column. Okay, another option is to disable. Every one of this has, every dictionary has disabled false by default, but this one I changed to disable true, just so you can see what it means. Disable true means that the age in this case is not going to be clickable. So you might want to do this for certain users where you can, depending on their age or depending on their on their needs, you disable a certain drop-down option. And in here, I disabled the age option. Okay. All right. So these are the options. Then the option height is actually the height between the options. So I choose borrow here. And you see there is a height between them. These are pixels. In this case, it's 35. But if I change this to, let's say, 25, we'll see that there's a difference in the heights. Let's let it load for a sec, and then we'll see how the heights differ. So you see how they're much closer to each other right now because the option height we chose is 25. All right, the value borrow, this is the value or the value parameter. The string you put in this value is the value that's going to go by default into the drop-down. So by default means if you refresh the page, this is the first value that the user is going to see. It's going to choose borrow. You can choose none, but in this case I want it to always show up as borrow first. So if they choose something, let's say species, and then they choose to, it changes, but then they choose to refresh the page, it's going to go into borrow. All right, and that's because the value is borrow. Disable. Don't get confused. This disabled is not this disabled. This disabled actually disables the whole drop-down selection. So if I change this to true, the whole drop-down will be disabled and the user will not be able to play around with the drop-down. You see? I can't even click on it. It's disabled. Let's change that back to false because we definitely want to play around with the drop-down. Multi allows you, on the right you'll see explanations. Multi allows you to use to choose multiple values within the drop-downs, not only one. So if I change this to true, you will see that now if I refresh this, I would be able to choose multiple values. So here I have borrow, I can choose also species, and maybe I want also animal condition. So it's something you can do. I built the connection between the drop-down and the pie chart in a way that it should only read one value, so this doesn't mean anything. That's why I'm going to change it to only have one value. So multi is going to be equal to false. All right. The next thing you want to see is searchable true. Searchable is a parameter that allows you or the user to actually type in anything they want to search. So you see right here, if I clear this, I can actually type in anything I want. I can type in Adam, my name, or I can type in, maybe I can type in start species, and then I have the options of, oops, sorry, borrow, and then I have the options on borrow, right? Here, it doesn't really matter because there's only like 5 options, but there's drop downs with 1,000 options or 2,000 options, and you don't want them to scroll and scroll until they look for the value, so that they can just look. If I'm looking for the country Zimbabwe, I can just click ZIM, and it will auto-populate Zimbabwe instead, or so I don't have to go all the way down and scroll and scroll and scroll until I find Zimbabwe. So that's the function of searchable. Searchable value, it's a bit more complicated. Searchable value remembers the value searched in the dropdown. So you just have to put an empty string here, and when it does, it allows the computer to remember the value that the user searched. So if I'm searching, for example, age, you see how it auto-populates on top? This doesn't mean anything. I just added this to this web app so you can actually see. But this doesn't mean anything. I'm just allowing you to see it. So you see how it's age, and I click enter. So it remembers, oops, sorry. Let's do age. I mean, age is blocked, so we can't use age. Let's use borrow. All right, so you see I just typed BORO, and that's why the search value that was searched was BORO. All right, so even if you didn't have this, I just added this so you can see. But now the computer actually remembers that the search value was BORO, and this is really used for special cases. If, for example, you have a million drop downs and you want to see if a user generally makes a misspelling mistake, or you want to see what the users tend to search for. Maybe they search for a certain value a lot more than other values when they type. So if you record this search value in the back end, like to an Excel sheet or to a Pandas data frame, after a certain amount of time, after like a month or a year, you can see what was the most searchable value and maybe play around with your drop-down options according to what the users are searching the most. Placeholder, please select. This is something that you can, it's a default text that's shown when no option is selected. So for example, right here, if I clear this, then you can see that there's please select. You can type anything you want here, and this is what it's going to be typed in. I typed please select, so that's what you see there. But for that, you need to make sure that clearable is true. Clearable true allows the user to remove the selected value, which is actually this X button. You see this X button here? I'm going to choose borrow. There's an X button. This is because searchable is true. If clearable was false, this would not be X. This would be, you couldn't clear it. You would always have one value there. Okay, now I'm styling. This is just one way to style the dropdown. I'm styling the width. So to do this, styling is always style equals dictionary with key and values. So I'm going to style the width in this case of the dropdown. So I'm going to say I want the width to be only 80%. So I refresh this, and now I see that it's not all the way to the end, it's only 80%. Okay, you can style the width, you can style the color, you can style anything you want. Now, if styling becomes too complicated and you want to style many things, what you can do is you can use a CSS document. Okay, what I'm using here is a CSS, well, you can use a CSS document and then you tie it to the class name, SelectBox. So let's see what this SelectBox means. I'm using a CSS document that I downloaded from the internet. It belongs to, I think, Chris Palmer, I think, wrote this in Plotly Dash and put it on the website. So I downloaded it from here. And this is the whole CSS document. I don't know most of these things here, but it allows me to play around with the styling of the web page. And this has to be, the CSS document has to be in your assets folder. So if you go into my code, this dropdown.py is inside my dropdown folder, and then right here, inside that folder, I also have an assets folder. So you have to create an assets folder, and inside the assets folder, you can put the CSS, you should put the CSS form, because that's the only way the Dash can read the styling of the CSS document. Okay, so it's in the CSS folder, in the assets folder, and now the question is, where did this come from? SelectBox, because the class name in the drop-down, the class name is not the name of the CSS form. It's actually the name of a class inside the CSS form. So in this case, SelectBox is something that I added right here in this CSS form, and it's all this. Again, I didn't write this. I just found this on the internet. I just looked for how to change the style of a dropdown, how to change the color of the values, and maybe the background of the style of the dropdown, and I found this. So I just copy pasted this. I know that the select box is the class name inside the CSS form, so I just copy this and put this into here. Okay, so now it's the class name. So now I save it, and you'll see that now you have this gray area behind the dropdown, and you'll have the values that are orange color. Beautiful. I mean, I really like it. This is something you do because you added the class name into the class name property, which belongs to the CSS form. It's one of the classes on the CSS form that I'm using inside the assets folder. Make sure to put the CSS form inside the assets folder. Okay, so let's X this out, hashtag this out. These two things are the last thing in the drop-down properties that you really want to, it's important to learn. What these do, this one true just means that you want to, it remembers the drop-down value that the user chose, and it has to be used with persistent type. So it has to be used with this. So if you're going to use persistent type, you have to do this true instead of false. What does persistent type mean? Persistent type means that it remembers the web page, remembers the drop-down value that was selected until you have three options. Until the browser tab is refreshed, until the browser tab is closed, or until the browser cookies are deleted. So let's play around with memory. Browser tab is refreshed. So what does this actually mean? It means, again, let's look at it. I'm refreshing. Cool. This means that now if I choose, for example, animal condition in my drop-down user, it changes the chart. But if I refresh, this value goes back to borrow, right? Because I chose memory. This only remembers the browser tab until the browser tab is refreshed. But if I choose session, this is going to remember until the browser tab is closed. What does that mean? That means, let's let it load. That means if I change it to any value, let's say species, let it load, it's going to change everything. It's going to stay species. Even if I refresh the tab, it's going to stay species. But if I close the tab, I'm going to copy this and do it again, and open a new tab with that website, then it comes back to borrow. Because session is only until the browser tab is closed. Local is the last one, and this is until the browser cookies are deleted. So if I refresh this or close the tab, it's still going to stay there. Let's take a look. We'll change this to animal, change it to species status. Refresh the tab, it's still there. Species status. Let's close the tab and recreate it. And open a new tab, it's still there. So the only reason this is going to disappear and go back to the default value, which we saw was borrow, the default value was borrow. The only way it's going to do that is if we actually delete the cookie history. So let's go to history and let's, how do I delete? Manage, oh, no, not manage. Right here, history, clear browsing data. Let's delete the last hour. Clear now. Perfect. And now let's redo the web app, and you'll see that it goes back to borrow because we deleted the cookies. So this is the persistent type and what you can do with it. So this is everything you can do with the drop down. Again, just go into this website, that belongs to Plotly Dash. You go all the way at the bottom. Well, at the top you'll see some examples here of the dropdowns we talked about, and then the bottom talks about all the references. But I gave it to you in a brief summary in my words of what these dropdowns mean, and that's all in red. If you enjoy this video, please click on the like button below because it helps other people see it as well, and tell other people about this this channel of Charming Data, because there's a lot to learn. And at the end of all these videos, after you watch a bunch of them, you will actually become an expert on data visualization in Python. Every week, we are going to learn a new drop-down component, so feel free to subscribe below and turn on your notifications for this channel so you can actually see when we talk about new drop-down components. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you have a good day and enjoy the rest of your day.